Hey, welcome, Chiefs Kingdom. This is a special edition of the Out of Structure podcast, or actually all the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network, covering live cut down day. It's like Christmas or your birthday. It comes once a year, except for the only difference is a whole bunch of grown men don't lose their jobs on your birthday or on Christmas. We're here watching as the news comes in. We have some that have been reported, many yet to come. But I'm live with my guys, Steven Serda and Maurice. And guys, what are you thinking so far? Any big takeaways already, or you just want to kind of get into it?
I mean, I don't think that there's been anything like majorly shocking from this. Like coming into today, we were all pretty set in stone. The Chiefs were going to carry 7 wide receivers. Like we knew that for a fact. And then, Amir Smith-Marset just balled all preseason, and so we were kind of sitting back like, I don't know, should they keep 8 wide receivers? Like, is he done enough for him to stay on the Kansas City Chiefs 53-man roster? And he didn't, and obviously we'll get into that stuff. But the Kansas City Chiefs under Andy Reid have never kept 7 wide receivers, so them keeping 8 wide receivers was a pretty big long shot. So I'm not really shocked that it played out the way that it did.
Yeah, I think it was Amir Smith-Marset became somebody that everybody was rooting for. Obviously, the first transaction of the day is trading him away. It sure netted a swap of future 7th-round picks, with some strings attached. So it's probably not a big return, but it certainly shows that he wasn't going to make that roster. And the real 7 were pretty well locked in from the get-go.
Yeah, and I think it kind of showed, too, that he definitely was. They knew he wasn't going to make it back to the practice squad, so let's try to get something for him that we can.
There was another trade today that was maybe even more surprising, and it's surprising in the fact that the Chiefs made a trade with a division rival. I guess I don't know if you can still call them a division rival. The Raiders of Las Vegas traded the Chiefs a defensive lineman, somebody out of LSU that we kind of had our eye on pre-draft. Neil Farrell Jr. He's a big guy, can play that nose or the one tech, just drafted last year. And so somebody with some contract still to go on his rookie deal. Any big takeaways from that trade? I'm sure you didn't call this one, Maurice, but what do you think? What do you think about the Chiefs trading with the Raiders?
Man, definitely didn't call it at all. Like, I was kind of shocked when I seen it, but then I understand why they had to kind of make this defensive tackle thing a priority. A lot of people, when I was looking up and down the feed, thinking like, okay, that means Chris Jones ain't reporting, ain't done. I don't think it's such a tell of that because of the type of technique position that this defensive tackle plays. You normally don't see, the trade within a division like that, but I think they don't think as the Raiders as any kind of type of competition. And the Raiders, I mean, they probably don't see him as somebody that's going to change the fortune of what they're going to do or the Chiefs going to do so much not to let it happen.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the trade or anything. Like it's a young player that I think Josh McDaniels is a bad coach, and I think the Raiders are a bad organization. So to give up on a young player that quickly and to trade him to a division rival is probably not the best business practice. But I think it says a lot about where the Chiefs are at with Chris Jones. And, it's something that we've talked about all offseason, all training camp. And, originally it's like, they're going to get a deal done because Brett Veach is so optimistic about everything. And the Chiefs are like, it's our number one priority. And now here we are, just barely over a week from the start of the regular season, and it doesn't seem like the Chiefs have any idea if Chris Jones is going to be there against the Lions. And, making this trade, I know he's not necessarily like a Chris Jones type of player, as our guy Jared Sapp pointed out. He might be more like a Danny Shelton, like what they wanted him to be. And maybe the Chiefs just weren't impressed enough with Danny Shelton. I know he had kind of a rough third preseason outing too, and Danny Shelton, we were optimistic he could be that kind of middle clogger, just big interior defensive lineman, but he might just be kind of at the tail end of his professional NFL career. And the Chiefs decided they saw an opportunity to go get a young defensive lineman. And so they did it, and they're hopeful that they can develop him into something more than the Raiders thought they could.
It looks like a little bit of a lower cost move as well. Shelton on that veteran contract would have been guaranteed, and it stayed on the roster for the first week. This guy is going to come in a little bit cheaper on that rookie deal from a cap hit perspective. And so worst case scenario, they bring him in. The cost isn't that great. They get a good look at him. Shelton is probably still out there on the street if they want to re-sign him. I know Shelton was pretty emphatic, though, about not wanting to be on a practice squad, really trying to make an actual roster this year. So I'll be curious to see if he's actually interested in the practice squad. I'm sure the Chiefs would love to have him on that 16-man practice squad that they can call up at any time, but I'll be curious to see if he's actually interested in settling for that.
Yeah, and I think with this move, like, we've talked about it a lot, and I feel like we're really, at least the team at Arrowhead Pride and everybody I've been doing podcasts with, like, it's starting to get real, and the interior of the Chiefs defensive line is starting to get really worrisome, where we spent this entire offseason talking about all the depth across this roster and like being really optimistic about the defense, but it's all built around Chris Jones. And now I'm worried week 1 against the Lions, where before I was like, no way Chiefs lose that opening night of the NFL season. And I still don't think the Chiefs are going to lose that game or anything, but the Lions are a good football team with a really good offensive line. And I don't know if the Chiefs are going to generate pressure against them. So It's definitely a red flag right now.
I was very optimistic. I thought this thing would be getting done and taken care of. I'm like, let's Brett Veach to figure out a way. He'll pay him and all of that. Like, and I was sitting probably banking on Chiefs being anywhere between 10 and 15 on far as defensive ranking, if not sneaking us out of the top 10. Now you on without a Chris Jones, you like, man, that means our corners got to be able to cover a little longer. The pressure's not coming right up the middle. It changes everything, really.
Yeah, I am worried about Chris Jones not being there. I'm not sure that those two things are completely correlated. This trade, to me, he's not a Chris Jones type player. He's somebody that has theoretical pass rush upside, but not actual pass rush ability at this point in his career. Now, Turk Wharton obviously can be your pass rushing 3 technique at times, and they need just a strong guy to play the nose tackle. I think Derek Notty's sort of been on a downward trajectory, so that this could be, just looking for bodies there. But if Chris Jones is not here, the pass rush is an issue. I think that's a given. But as it pertains to roster cuts, the thing to watch with Chris Jones for me is, are they going to put him on that reserve did not report list? Because that would free up the roster spot or keep that roster spot open for somebody else. But it would be a clear sign that they don't expect him anytime soon, and they're going to have to go on about their business. If they don't make that move, you would think that it's a sign that they're going to maybe have some optimism there. If they do make that move, we could be in for a long wait.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on the Chiefs to finalize their initial 53-man roster. So we're just past the deadline right now. So the Chiefs usually take this thing right up to the 3 p.m. deadline, and then hopefully we'll know here pretty quick. But we got a handful of moves to discuss and kind of dissect for this Chiefs roster. So
you bet. And there's a couple of minor surprises so far. So let's talk through these. Again, Shane Buechele being one of those. Chiefs at this point are carrying 2 quarterbacks. They've released their other 2. Buechele being one that they kept on the roster all year last year and protected when other teams tried to sign him. Now he'll go through the waiver wire, and other teams will have a chance to claim him. I would assume that he's coming back for the practice squad if he gets through there. But are you surprised they didn't roll with 3 quarterbacks on the 53?
I'm definitely surprised. I thought definitely after the second preseason game, I thought he had a real inside chance up to get the number 2 spot. Then he kind of came out game 3 kind of flat, 2 bad interceptions. But even then, I'm like, he'll stay on the 3. I thought they would keep 3 quarterbacks, no doubt. Definitely with the new rule coming out where they could have kept him on the roster and have him there for game day and not count against the game day total of who you can have active on game day. So I thought Buechele will definitely be there. But now I don't know if he makes it back. I really not sure if he clears waivers. Like that's a huge concern. I don't know if he clears it.
There was a random Twitter X report that the Chiefs had some interest in Carson Wentz. Could this be a sign that they're letting both of the young guys go and they're going to bring in another veteran when they have the roster reshuffled this week?
I really hope not. I don't want Carson Wentz on the roster. I don't, not even factoring in his poor play. It seems like the guy's been kind of a bad teammate everywhere he's been. So I'd rather just not bring him in at all. But he is 100% the kind of quarterback that Andy Reid would be like, I can fix him. Like I could, this coaching staff will get the most out of him. But no, I think it just comes back to, and on the Arrowhead Pride Rapid Reaction show, I spent the last 2 weeks apologizing to Rocky Magana because after week 1 of the preseason, he was like, we've got a backup quarterback controversy. And I was like, no, we don't. Like, it's Blaine Gabbert. We all know it's Blaine Gabbert. Andy's just getting cute in the preseason, and Shane's a fun story. And he's this, and this is going back a couple of years now where Shane Buechele is this quarterback for the Chiefs. And I was just like, the reason that, last season he was never going to beat out Chad Henne. I was like, I don't think he's going to beat out Blaine Gabbert. And it was a long shot for him to make this roster. And I think the Chiefs feel totally comfortable just carrying 2 quarterbacks and then figuring out the rest. And this is a team that a few years back just brought in Matt Moore, like on a whim when Chad Henne got hurt and Patrick Mahomes.
That worked out pretty well.
And Matt Moore was fine. So I think the Chiefs are comfortable. This has always been Andy's MO with these situations. Like, is just more comfortable with a seasoned veteran who has played a lot in the NFL than a guy like Shane Buechele, who just doesn't have any experience. And I think this is actually probably long-term, like a better thing for Shane, where now he's going to be able to, if he clears waivers and maybe he gets claimed by another team, which could improve his situation, go into a team that has a need for a backup quarterback where he can really compete for a 53-man roster spot, or if he clears waivers and he wants to go talk to other teams and see what else is out there, maybe he can. And then if that doesn't work out, maybe he does come back to the Chiefs practice squad. But he's a young player, and so I just think this is a good opportunity for him to see what else is out there if he doesn't feel like he's ever going to secure a roster spot for the Chiefs.
Absolutely. You guys ready to talk running backs? Because we thought there was a competition for RB4 here, that it started off Deneric Prince as the surprise of the preseason or the offseason program. Then it was LaMichael Pirine. And then the Chiefs went and just released both of them. So both of those guys were cut today. I would assume they'd want one or both of them back on the practice squad. But is there a little bit of surprise here that they're going with 3 running backs and those guys aren't among them?
It's a total surprise for me. I wrote an article earlier this year about undrafted free agents I thought would make it. Prince was one of them that I thought would make it. And then when you seen Pirine come on in the preseason, I'm like, okay. And then you seen Prince try to take that dive, so you're like, okay, he'll be the 4th running back. And then I also had the thought, like, okay, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not starting and he's not number 2, do they figure out something to do with him before, the cut down day and keep Pirine as the 3rd if they only plan on keeping 3? So it was all these scenarios where I thought that we would only keep 3, and I thought Clyde would be the odd man out and eventually Prince would be the practice squad. But looks like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, McKinnon, and Pacheco's who the Chiefs is rolling with.
I think I even said that Prince was, at least at one point, going to be the 4th running back if they kept 4, and he might be the 3rd if they kept 3. That's obviously things have changed over the last couple of weeks, and you could see that trend in practice. You can see the reports coming out day after day. Hey, by the way, Pirine's getting more reps, and it surely was highlighted in the way they played in that last preseason game.
And I know Stags has always been a Clyde supporter, but I feel like a lot of people owe Clyde an apology because we've been going through this on Show and BK because Brandon Kiley, I think he even tweeted this during the Chiefs preseason game, like LaMichael Pirine is better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which, maybe he is, but the Chiefs value Clyde, and I thought that was pretty clear because initially it was like, is Clyde getting the Ronald Jones treatment where he's getting all these preseason reps to try to get a team interested in trying to trade a late round pick for him or something like that? But we knew Jerick McKinnon wasn't going to play in the preseason. We knew Isaiah Pacheco was going to get very limited time in the preseason. I think Isaiah Pacheco had 1 carry in the entire preseason. And Clyde was getting the reps, and then after that, it was Prince and Pirine. And I really thought LaMichael Pirine had probably done enough to make the roster, but when you carry 7 wide receivers, I think that's tough. When you have so many questions about your defensive line, I think it's tough to carry 4 running backs when Pacheco's going to have a role. McKinnon's going to have a role. Clyde is a seasoned veteran running back who can step in and have a role and be a contributor if one of those guys isn't healthy or something like that. So it was always a long shot. Deneric Prince is the surprise here after all of the preseason hype and training camp hype, but I think the writing was on the wall for him when we saw that it was clear that he had lost his kick return job to Richie James. And once you don't have, as an undrafted player, once you don't have that foothold in Dave Tobe's room, it's probably not a good call for you to make the roster.
Yeah, you're right. I've been trying to preach about Clyde for a long time. Now, Clyde was a very productive player early last season. He had a lot of touchdowns early in the season, got hurt, came back, and by that point that he was sort of out of the mix or out of the rotation. Financially, it didn't make a ton of sense for them to cut him this season. You're talking about $2.7 million in dead cap this year for what? You're going to pay $2.7 million to not have depth at the running back position. So to me, it never made sense to cut Clyde. I could see the trade because the trade finances work out a little bit differently there. They'd save a little bit more on the trade than they would on the cut. But he still can be a valuable NFL player. You got some highlight reel Mahomes touchdown throws from last year going to Clyde. He's never going to be a big yards per carry guy. He's never going to be a big breaking long touchdowns. But as that receiving back, as that guy who can come in and take a lot of snaps and take some of that wear and tear off of Pacheco, I think it still makes a lot of sense for him to be on the roster unless they find a much, much better option. And to me, the fact that they let these 2 guys go says they don't have a much, much better option.
I think, too, with the running backs, like it's, Jonathan Taylor for the Indianapolis Colts is a player that everybody's waiting to see if he got traded because he's a star running back and he's available, and he did not get traded. But it's like when you're the Chiefs and you look at the running back room, you're like, what do we actually need out of our running backs? Because there's different things that certain teams need out of the running backs. And the Chiefs just need you to block, and the Chiefs need you to know where you're supposed to go when the ball snapped to Patrick Mahomes, and occasionally rip off a run. But most of the time they just need you to know your assignment because you're not going to get asked to carry the ball 20 times a game or something like that. And I think they have that in all 3 of the guys that they have on the roster.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the Chiefs is definitely with Pacheco, that guy that can come in fourth quarter, grind it out, and be able to run that clock out and be able to take care of that definitely helps out the Chiefs there. But I still think, I don't know. I thought P.R. was going to, based off what he showed the last couple of games, I definitely thought he was going to be one to make the roster. I definitely seen that coming. I was shocked when I seen I seen the Prince one come first. So when I seen the Prince news that he got released, I was like, P. Ron made it. Mm-hmm. So then when I seen the news that P. Ron got cut too, I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah, here we are. Clyde has officially made the roster.
Just goes to show you preseason results do not matter. It's literally just where the coaches see players in their roles. And that's part of why I think another guy I wanted to talk about who made the wide receiver room, everybody's favorite, Justin Ross, on the 53-man roster. There was a lot of times where I didn't believe it was going to happen, but it seems like he was steadily making the most of his opportunities. In fact, one of the most encouraging things I saw from him is that day he was carted off and then came back to practice the next day. So you're seeing this. He's taking some hits. He's getting banged up. He's staying on the field. Encouraging signs for a young player who's struggled with injuries already so far in his career. But I don't think there's anybody out there who's disappointed that Justin Ross is one of the 7 wide receivers that made this roster.
Yeah, I definitely was happy when I seen that news come out for him making the roster. I mean, what a great story, right? Everybody knows that. And I mean, it goes to say that if he wouldn't have suffered those injuries, everybody thought he was going to be a first round, second round pick at the latest, right? So Brett V special, you get somebody who was supposed to be up there, take him in, get him with the medical staff and bring him back. And I think kind of what just kind of solidified it for him, if you really just paid attention to his route running. Some of his route running you've seen throughout camp, and some of the route running you've seen even in some of the preseason games, it would have been hard to let him go. I always kind of thought it was going to be between him and Richie James on that last, fighting for that last spot. But then Richie James showed so much too, so it was like, man, is Andy really going to keep 7? That was always, I think, the biggest question, because I think this is the first season that Andy kept 7 wide receivers. So it was just a huge question on would he do it despite how good everybody was. I don't think either one of those guys make it back to a practice squad if you let a Richie James or a Ross go. So I'm excited to see what he does this year, how he fits in. I definitely see some red zone packages with him, and the fact that he'll go up and get the ball, definitely taking kind of that Jody Forster type package in there with him being out. So yeah, I'm excited to see Ross, as the rest of Chiefs Kingdom probably is as well.
And I really agree with what Maurice said about his route running ability, because he's a player who, he had the spinal fusion thing that he was coming back from, but he also was out last year with the foot injury, and it was a significant foot injury that he had to work his way back from. And so, like, seeing him run routes, and not just run routes and get open, and I know he was predominantly playing against like 2s and 3s in the preseason, but he looked clean when he was running the routes. Like, he looked good doing it, and it looked like he was getting open with ease. And when you're playing against second and third stringers, that's what you want to see. You want to see those guys are clearly better than the other guys that they are putting out there on the field. And I think that's what you saw with Justin Ross. But, like, also, after the way the Chiefs have kind of marketed him to the fan base, like, all offseason, like,
that's right,
they would have freaked out if Justin Ross didn't make this team. Like, we knew for a fact Justin Ross was making this team. But it is a great story, and I hope he continues to be an amazing story for them this season. Like, I hope he's not just on the roster. I hope he is a contributing player who makes plays for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Absolutely. Serda and I are just here to back up what Maurice is saying, because what I was trying to get at earlier, and you made this point exactly, is sometimes it's not about who's the best player in the preseason, but do they find a specific role, something that they can do unique that other players on the roster maybe don't. And for Justin Ross, that is that red zone ability. It is what Jody Fortson would have been doing had he been healthy and still here. I think that injury to Jody Fortson may have done more to solidify Ross's spot on this roster than just about anything else. Again, other than his ability to stay on the field. I think those are the two things that we're missing. But yeah, route running translates, and I think if you got a player who can get open and is that red zone threat, you can find work for him.
Absolutely.
We got some great comments. Thanks, everybody, for joining us live on the Out of Structure podcast special for Cut Down Day. Thanks to Larry McGill for all the clarifications and points you're putting out there. There's also a question here from TC Riley 27. Have you guys seen any waived or released players from other teams that would interest you in seeing the Chiefs bringing them in?
I've been so focused on the Chiefs stuff, I'm not really paying attention to what other teams are doing, but that's something once we get out of here and we get through the initial reaction and get the official 53-man roster, then I'll kind of start looking at everybody else's stuff. I know a big one was Albert O was supposed to get cut by the Denver Broncos, but then in Eagles fashion, Howie Roseman swoops in, sends a late round pick to acquire him. Those are the kind of moves you'd like to see the Chiefs make, but it's something that's been brought up multiple times by John Dixon and Jared Sapp at Arrowhead Pride. Like, I think the Chiefs' hands are kind of tied right now, money-wise. So I don't know exactly what they're going to be looking to do because of the Chris Jones thing, because they have to free up money to sign their 53 and practice squad. Like, I just think things are really tight right now. And so I think the Chiefs are it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 24 hours with the Chiefs and if they do actually try to make any waiver moves or anything.
Yeah, I think the cap issue is going to be there. There'll be some moves yet to come. I'm sure they will pick up somebody else. I mean, they've already acquired one player via trade. Again, for those of you just joining, that is a defensive tackle that came from the Raiders, of all places, that, again, may have a shot to make this roster, may not. And we've read, a lot or not a lot into that move. But yeah, keeping an eye on other players that are out there. I would assume they're going to make a couple more moves, but I haven't seen anything so far. Alberto being the one that I was at least mildly interested in. Other than that, I haven't seen anybody else. There's been a few corners, maybe a couple guys I like coming out in the draft that just haven't panned out for their respective teams. But when the flurry of moves happen like this, it might take a little bit for the dust to settle and for us to see who else is out there.
And I will say we're about 45 minutes past the deadline, and the Chiefs have still not released their official 53-man roster, which to me says they have to have all that stuff into the NFL by 3 p.m. and like have it all official. But I still think there's some things going on that they're trying to figure out last minute, and that's why we haven't gotten the initial roster yet. So
yeah, they definitely want to have those one-on-one conversations with people who make and don't make the roster. There's a lot of those things that go on behind the scenes, and I'm sure they want to do it in the right way or in the right order. But yeah, that deadline at 3:00 was to get those moves into the league. They can care less when they tell the rest of us as we sit and wait. Is there anybody, while we wait, is there anybody that you guys were just pounding the table for, like, that's my guy, I want to see them make the roster at all costs, whether we've heard about their fate yet or not? Is there somebody you were pounding the table for?
Yeah, for me, it was Khalif Halassi. I kind of follow him just through the draft process and everything. I was surprised when he didn't get drafted. I thought he was going to go late round to somebody. In every kind of mock draft that I did, I kept taking him for the Chiefs like the 6th or 7th round. So I was happy when I seen him get signed as an undrafted free agent. But then when he made that first interception in the preseason, the first preseason game, we jumped at him like, okay, he's making some buzz because you really hadn't heard anything about him throughout camp. So I thought he was very sticky in man coverage, good in press. I'm definitely hoping he makes it back to the practice squad, but I was definitely pounding the table thinking he might be able to be that 6th corner or that 5th corner. But yeah, when I seen him get released, I was like, man. So that's who I was pounding the table for, definitely.
Serda, who's your guy?
I like Maurice's pick because I think that interception he had in the preseason was athletic. That was a tough play. So he was a guy that I thought the Chiefs really liked. And then another guy that I really liked and that was a good training camp story was Echo Boydo. And, early on in camp, Nazeed Johnson was getting a ton of time. And it seemed like the Chiefs were really confident that he could be like a potential rotational corner for them. And then he tears his ACL, and Echo Boydo got tons of time. And he was this undrafted local player who the Chiefs were really positive about and seemed to really like. And so I was hoping he would have a strong chance of making the roster just because I thought it was a really good training camp story. And, he doesn't make the roster. It's tough to make a 53-man roster in the NFL, but hopefully he works his way back to the practice squad, or hopefully he showed enough that somebody else will pick him up.
Yeah, I think he'd be an ideal practice squad candidate. He definitely showed out in preseason. But yeah, I mean, the Chiefs are loaded with young corners, and so that's not going to be easy for any of those guys. I was rooting for Danny Shelton. I mean, the guy, is again a player that I like coming out of the draft, and it hasn't really panned out to his full ability in the NFL. But just a mountain of a man, even after losing some weight, he can be really a force in there. And I think having a change at that nose tackle position would have been fun to see. Again, he's a vested veteran, so he's not waived. He doesn't have a chance to get claimed by another team. So there's always a chance that they'll re-sign him, maybe right after roster cuts, maybe after week 1 when those veteran salaries are no longer guaranteed, and he can be brought in on a non-guaranteed contract after that, maybe something with some incentives in it. So we'll see what happens with him. I got a feeling we haven't seen the last of him, but I certainly think he did everything he could to make this roster.
Yeah, I was definitely. I mean, because he showed out in preseason. Like you can see just with the little weight loss that he got, he was a little bit more fluent in his movement. He played some solid games up to the game, game 3. But I think he really needed a strong showing there too to probably make that last push for it. But I definitely hope to see him back. Definitely think if he doesn't sign somewhere else, he kind of, like you said earlier, made it clear that he didn't want to be another practice squad guy. But if nobody else picks him up, I'm sure he'll still come back and take that practice squad money.
Yeah. And honestly, like I know BJ Thompson was a draft pick this year, but like him making the initial 53 is kind of a long shot player. I think says a lot about what the Chiefs think about him. And, I think he pretty much took the spot of Joshua Kando, who was another late round draft pick by the Chiefs. But he's a player who's just been injured a lot and has struggled to find his way onto the field. And so he's stuck around the last couple of years and actually had some nice moments in the Chiefs preseason finale. But just ultimately, I think that's really what it came down to is like BJ Thompson's younger. We just drafted him. He's a developmental guy who's got a lot of tools in like his speed rush and athleticism. And they just decided that they wanted to keep that over a guy like Joshua Kando.
Want to get you guys on the record here. Over under, how many players did Pete get right on his 53-man prediction 4.0? I'm going to set the over under at 48. Over or under 48 for Pete's 4.0.
I'd say over. I bet he got like 49, 50. I bet there's only a couple.
I'm going to take the under.
I'm going to go under as well because I think there's some moves yet to come. If you compare right now with what we know so far, he had LaMichael P. Ryan on there. Obviously, at this point, that's one down. He also had Deion Bush, so that's two.
He had Shane on there.
He did have Shane Buechele. That's three. So we're already at 50, Serda. You might have taken the wrong side of this particular bet. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah. Oh, well, whatever. Chiefs made a mistake cutting Shane Buechele.
Any other surprises or intriguing players? I've got two that I'm curious to see what happens with them. See if you guys have any last-minute predictions for. Maybe you all have some as well. Just players that we still don't know their fate, but it's kind of intriguing to see what happens. I'm going to start the bidding with a Nico Remigio. What do we think is going to happen? And we're pretty sure he has not made the roster as a receiver. We think we know the 7 receivers that are on the roster. Is this a guy that sticks around? Is his injury serious enough that they could, give him a redshirt year? What do you think happens with our boy Nico?
I think if they can give him a redshirt year, that would be ideal for him. But I honestly see, even if they don't get him trying to make it back to the practice squad, I think he had a, of course, big game 1 where, it was nice. So it's obvious he ain't part of the 7 that made it. But I think if they can get him on a red shirt year, that'll probably be ideal to kind of keep him around without using up a spot for him on the practice squad. So, yeah, I hope he makes it back in some form or fashion or sticks around in some form or fashion.
And I think with him, too, it kind of depends on – and maybe we'll learn something about this in the next 24 hours or maybe we won't. But I think depending on the move, it says something. But it's Kadarius Toney. And the Chiefs seem to be optimistic that he can play week 1. But as you guys know, he got hurt on the first day of training camp. And so we just went an entire training camp without seeing Kadarius Toney involved at all in practice in any way. So I think him being available for week 1, I would be shocked if he's somehow on the field and playing for the Chiefs week 1. But if he's not healthy yet and they think he needs more time, he is like a PUP candidate. And if they put him on the PUP list, he had to make the initial 53-man. But if they put him on the PUP, he's going to be out the first 4 games of the season. So that's the Chiefs committing to saying he's not quite healthy enough for something.
Not to fact check you, Serda, but he won't be eligible for the PUP because he practiced during training camp. But you can put him on the injured reserve list after the initial 53, and then they'll
short-term IR or whatever.
Yeah, he'd be eligible to return as early as 4 weeks, and then start practicing pretty early on. So that IR with that designation to return, I got a feeling there's a handful of candidates for that on this roster. I've heard a couple names brought up that I wasn't expecting, like Nick Allegretti. L'Jarius Sneed, obviously some guys who have been battling some injuries. Would be interesting to see if any of those guys end up making the initial roster, but then going on injured reserve as of tomorrow. Anybody who goes on injured reserve before the deadline is out for the season. So I think that's going to be a big distinction is if you see the announcement come out we have placed so-and-so on injured reserve and it's coming out now, that guy's out for the year. It's only those that make the roster today that can go on that injured reserve tomorrow that actually have a chance to return. So the way they play those injury designations could be real interesting.
Yeah, I think too. I'm pretty surprised with the offensive line, and like I really thought we were going to see, and there was actually quite a few trades today, a bunch of kicker trades for some reason. I don't know what that was about,
Right.
but I really thought, and I know Ron Kopp has talked about this a lot, and we've talked a lot about it on Arrowhead Pride, but I mean the Chiefs just have a lot of offensive linemen, and Darian Kennard, second-year player, so maybe you don't want to move on from him. But Lucas Niang is a guy who's been around for several years, struggled to stay healthy, but has shown that he's probably an NFL offensive lineman, like could net some value from somebody like a mid-round pick or something like that and provide valuable offensive line depth. And Prince Tega Winogo is a guy that they seem to really like. And then you factor in third-round pick Wanye Morris. Like I really thought we were going to see them move an offensive lineman, and I'm kind of shocked that we didn't, and that it didn't really like they didn't wind up like cutting one of those guys either, because it's just a lot of guys to carry on the roster like that.
Yeah, that was my next guy I wanted to talk about was Prince Tega Winogo, because he's really, I think he's taking a step forward this offseason. He's some of this they seem to trust as their backup left tackle. I'm not sure that they've got another guy that has shown enough as a backup left tackle to make this roster. So for my money, I'm keeping Prince on this roster, and I'm trying to figure out what to do to Lucas Niang, because Wanye is making the team. If Prince makes the team also, I don't know what role or what purpose keeping Lucas Niang serves at this point. I think he'd be somebody that they should, if they haven't already, really give a strong look to trying to trade.
Yeah, he's the one that I thought was going to be traded somehow. Of course, Morris being drafted this year, third round. I knew that he wasn't going to go anywhere, but he didn't look too strong at left tackle yet. But he looked like he can be a viable option to be up the backup right. So then, Lucas Niang always kind of stayed on that right side and looked more comfortable on the right than the left as well. So that kind of locks in Prince right there for the backup at left. So Niang is really carrying five tackles just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So I would definitely still probably see some type of move coming with Lucas Niang. And you would think that you can get some type of draft compensation for him. Somebody has to be looking for some depth there on their offensive line where you can get something for him.
Yeah, I feel like you see those guys get traded all the time, like for 5th-round pick or whatever. Like, because I think Lucas Niang has shown enough this preseason, like he could be a solid backup offensive lineman in the NFL, or a guy that can give you some valuable reps as long as he's healthy and can stay on the field. So I would think they would be able to find some value in him. But I think while we're still waiting for them to finalize this 53-man roster, I think we'll see them be kind of busy over the next 8 days or whatever leading up to the NFL kickoff.
You got any other names that you're curious to see what happens with them that's still up in the air?
The linebacker group, I'm kind of just curious of how that depth is going to roll. I know it came out that Cam Jones was making the team, so you got Cochran. That's still kind of up in the air what they're going to do with him, if he's going to make it back to the practice squad. I'm just interested to see what the depth positions is going to look like behind the starting linebackers there. And safety, Deion Bush was kind of surprised. I'm wondering if they're going to bring him back.
So that was who I was thinking, because he's a player that they really seem to like, but he is a veteran player, so he's not going to be subject to waivers, so they can bring him back on the practice. So he's at least one of those players that, they can make a handshake deal. Like, we got to cut you right now, but we got to make some transactions to bring you back later. And I think, unfortunately for him, I think Chamari Connor's play in the preseason had just kind of made him expendable, but not necessarily a guy that they aren't still interested in bringing back to the practice squad, because Chamari Connor was on the field a lot in the preseason, and Spags was using him a lot and in a lot of fun ways too. So I think that they got more than they were necessarily expecting out of Chamari Connor, and then you have the veteran in Mike Edwards that they seem like they know they can rely on in a pinch if they need him to play a lot or something like that. So it was just kind of Deion Bush was just the odd man out in that safety room.
Yeah, they typically carry 10 defensive backs, and there's a chance that they go 6 corners, 4 safeties, as opposed to going 5 and 5. It kind of depends on who they like. Maybe it depends on the health of Nick Jones being that last corner. Maybe there's another guy they decide to keep there. I know they liked Anthony Cook, or they liked what they saw from him this preseason. He was released with the option to come back to the practice squad, hopefully. So, but there's not a ton of other safeties in the mix for this team. So if it's not Deion Bush, and if he ends up on the practice squad, then there's a decent chance they only go with 4 safeties and they just have an extra corner.
I did think of a player that got cut today and this is more, I don't want them to bring this player back. It's Damian Williams. He got released this afternoon, and I saw a lot of people like, bring him home, bring him back at least to the practice squad or something. No. Damian Williams is done. I'm sorry. Like, he's a Super Bowl hero. We'll have fond memories of him for the rest of our lives. Damian Williams is probably done in the NFL. He doesn't belong on the Chiefs roster. There's better guys out there that they can go give practice squad slots to.
Another one for that category is Marcus Kemp, wide receiver and special teams.
Marcus Kemp's going to wind up on this team. Marcus Kemp's going to make his way back probably.
I know, but come on. With all the promising young receivers they've got, do you really want to see them?
Dave Tove's going to be like, go get him. Go get my guy.
Go get my guy.
Dave Tobe is going to send his jet to get him. Yeah. So here we are at 4:00 Central Time, and we have yet to see anything official. Last year by this time we were deep in the throes of talking about who's going to be on the practice squad. There's a lot of candidates for the practice squad this year, and I think it can be particularly loaded, especially with the new practice squad rules that have come in over the last couple of years. You can have 6 veterans on your practice squad with unlimited amounts of experience out of that 16-man group. I think they could have a fairly loaded practice squad if some of these guys get through and end up getting signed back there with the depth of this team. Is there anybody that you're hoping for to continue developing on the practice squad?
I mean, hopefully it's Echo Boydo and players like that, because I think it's a really underrated part of the Chiefs over the last several years, but they have proven that this coaching staff can really develop corners, and they can find them from all over the place and get a lot out of them. So I think those guys who flashed in the preseason, working their way back to the practice squad, even though the Chiefs are top heavy in the cornerback room right now, and we still don't know what's going on with L'Jarius Sneed, but I'm not optimistic L'Jarius Sneed's going to play week 1 with that knee injury that basically held him out all of training camp. So I just think those guys being able to get back to the practice squad and have an opportunity to continue to work with the Chiefs coaching staff and in that room, I think it's valuable for guys like that.
So we do have breaking news. The Chiefs have officially tweeted out or X'd out their mandated 53-man roster. Starting to look through this list, not a lot of big surprises on it. I think most everybody that they've waived or released has been who you would expect to see. Looking down the list, some things that are maybe a little bit surprising. We did talk about injuries. Nico Remigio was waived injured. That's somebody who could revert back to IR or they could give an injury settlement. Same thing with Jerome Carvin, the offensive lineman out of Tennessee. And man, I'm not even going to try with this name, but the linebacker out of Rutgers as well was waived injured. They did put Chris Jones on the reserve did not report list, so they'll have the roster exemption for Jones at this point. And they announced the 2 trades in addition to the rest of their moves. As you look through this list of players that were released or waived, is there anybody that stands out that we hadn't talked about yet?
Well, they did waive Darian Kennard.
Yeah.
So that's a surprise. I mean, he was a late round pick last year, and just watching him in the preseason, it just doesn't seem like he's taken any significant steps. And he wasn't active last year. Like he wasn't a guy that got on the field for the Chiefs. So I guess it's not a surprise when I was just talking about all the offensive line depth, and I was like, what are they doing carrying all these guys? I guess it makes sense that they released Darian Kennard.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
the one that
again,
jumps
practice
off to
squad
me too.
candidate, somebody who could easily come back, hasn't shown enough or really anything in the NFL yet. So I wouldn't think that other teams are, really in on Darian Kennard at this point.
Yeah, he jumps off to me, and then of course we finally seen the Bushman release that I was waiting to see if we was going to carry 4 tight ends or not. So it looks like they're going with the three tight ends. So I was worried that they would go 3 tight ends, definitely being that they cut out the fullback position.
Mm-hmm.
So of course with Jody being hurt, you was wondering if Bushman will make that leap, but he kind of had a couple of bad drops his last preseason game that didn't go too well for him. So it's kind of interesting there how that shapes up with the kind of fullback position and no 4 tight end, how that's going to look. But I still think it's kind of deep at defensive linemen and offensive linemen is where they kind of carry some extra bodies there that look besides the 7 receiver.
Yeah, I think Matt Bushman was a guy we were kind of looking out for because he really made a lot of plays in the preseason and like was really looking good in training camp. But obviously Travis Kelce's not going anywhere, and they're really, really high on Noah Gray, and just the amount of wide receivers they were going to have to carry into the season, it was always going to be tough. And then Blake Bell is a guy that they're just going to keep around. He's going to keep making this team for a while, probably until somebody else gives him a reason to cut him. But other than that, and Darian Kennard, I don't think there's any other major surprises other than the guys that we already knew. Like Cornell Powell had some nice moments this preseason, but he is a late round pick who is just kind of stuck around on the Chiefs practice squad. And in that deep wide receiver room, we knew he just wasn't going to make the roster. Maybe he's still a practice squad candidate, but I would have to imagine the Chiefs are probably just moving on from Cornell Powell at this time.
DiCaprio Bootle is another name we just talked about that was waived. He's the cornerback who was the loudest man in training camp, the guy in the middle of all the kerfuffles that came up, but also the guy who got the biggest cheers when he got an interception in the 3rd preseason game. So clearly somebody that's been a big part of this team, at least at the bottom end of the roster, could easily be a practice squad candidate.
Well, we got a 53, and we got an answer on Chris Jones, at least for now. That's gonna be interesting over the next week or so. Watching how that unfolds. I don't know. I'm pretty confident Chris Jones is going to miss games to start the season now.
Yeah.
All right. So as we talk about the offensive line, looks like Mike Caliendo made the roster. This is a player that a couple folks had talked about that they liked last season as he came in as an undrafted free agent. Unless I'm missing something, it looks like he made this initial 53-man roster over the man we just talked about, Darian Kennard.
I just think that like Steven said, like Kennard just didn't take a big enough leap forward. Like you could tell the struggles he had last season, and you kind of still seen those struggles shining through this year. Like it just wasn't the big leap that you would have liked to see. Definitely with all, even being a late round pick last year, there was a kind of a lot of talk and hype around him coming in, definitely trying to be that right tackle, but eventually everybody knew he probably would get moved to guard. But you just haven't really seen him take that step forward.
Every with him last going to happen.
Yeah, I think with Kennard, it was that thing where it was always like it's kind of too small to be an NFL tackle. And then, transitioning to guard, and I think he played some guard in the preseason and just didn't look particularly good there. And, we know the Chiefs are kind of stacked on the interior of that offensive line anyway. So it was just always going to be rough for Darian Kennard to make it. I'm surprised that he didn't stick around, but yeah, I just don't think that he had shown the signs of improvement that they look for in that kind of guy to make this team on what's probably the deepest Chiefs roster that we've had in a long time.
Did keep 6 linebackers, Jack Cochran being released into Cam Jones. So that's a little bit of an interesting development there. I think this linebacker room is much improved. It's because of Drew Tranquil. That guy has really come in and shown a lot of what they hoped he could be, I think, in the preseason. I think he's going to have a monster role this year on this team. But there's still the development of Leo Chenal as well. I know he had the hip pointer this last week, but assuming that he's healthy and good to go, I'm not sure how much those last two linebackers should see the field unless it's on special teams.
Yeah, I feel like if Chanel, I think that that hip pointer may make him miss a little bit, and it may be the reason they keep 6. So I think if that injury doesn't turn out to be the same, I would say if they do make a move and try to bring some people in, that's where you're probably going to see one of those spots open up real quick. I think they're probably on that bubble for the rest of the season, probably.
Yeah, don't get too comfortable. Make sure you don't sign any mortgages or any long-term other financial commitments if you're some of these guys who may be on that bubble. It's hard to tell at first glance, but if you had to say your last three guys that made the roster, Mike Caliendo is probably one of those. Cam Jones is probably another. I'm not sure who the third guy is, but there's a couple of guys there that are their fortunes are not done yet, not sealed yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think we're going to see the Chiefs pretty busy over the next couple of days too. That's kind of how these things go too. Even after you set your initial 53, then as we were talking about, like other guys that are getting waived across the league, like players that they've shown interest in the past become available and they decide, well, we'd rather take a chance on this guy than that guy. And it'll still be a busy couple of days as they kind of tighten up the back of the roster. But we know what the Chiefs are going to be rolling into week 1 with, at least outside of, L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones right now.
That's why they call it the initial 53 and not the final 53. We're really careful to use those words as this announcement comes out. Thanks to everybody for joining us on the live edition of the Out of Structure podcast. We can go ahead and wrap up there unless anybody has any final parting thoughts before we get out of here.
Just make sure you're on the lookout for all of our content at arrowheadpride.com. Pete and John will have a bunch of stuff up for you here pretty quick on the Chiefs initial 53-man roster. We'll have all kinds of write-ups from our entire team. As always, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review everything that we're doing on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network, because we got a lot of stuff coming out this week as we get you guys ready for week 1 against the Detroit Lions.
Absolutely. Go out there and sign up and subscribe for the newsletter that's coming out weekly. So you can go to Arrowhead Pride Twitter and see that post, and you can sign up for that, get that exclusive content from Arrowhead Pride, and ready for this season to start, ready for the real season to start, ready to get back to it.
All right, gentlemen. I'm Matt Stagner here with Maurice Elston, Steven Serda. Thanks everybody for being on. Thanks for sticking with us, and we'll talk to you again soon on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network.